Poco Marco T Piasta Meda.
The sun was just beginning to set, casting an eerie orange glow over the deserted field. 100 people stood in a perfectly straight line, their expressions ranging from confusion to mild amusement. They had all been gathered under mysterious circumstances, lured in by promises of a grand prize beyond their wildest dreams. No one knew what the game truly was. No one suspected the horror that awaited them. At the far end of the field stood a giant mechanical doll, its oversized eyes glowing an unnatural shade of red. Its mouth opened, and a robotic voice rang out, "Green light." Confused but obedient, the participants began to move forward hesitantly. A few chuckled, recognizing the children's game from their youth. But before anyone could fully grasp the situation, the doll's eyes turned red. Red light. A deafening silence followed. Then a single man twitched. It was barely noticeable, just a slight shift in his balance. A gunshot cracked through the air. The man collapsed instantly, a red stain spreading across his chest. For a moment, the world seemed frozen in time. Then came the screams. Panic erupted as several players attempted to run, but before they could take more than a few steps, a barrage of bullets tore through them. The once playful game had become a battlefield, and the rules were simple: obey or die. The surviving players stood in horror, their minds racing. This wasn't just a game, it was an execution. As the doll's voice rang out again, some players hesitated, paralyzed by fear. But others realized there was no choice. The only way out was forward. Among them was Nathan Carter, a former soldier who had seen combat but never anything like this. He took a deep breath, blocking out the chaos around him. Every step had to be calculated, every movement precise. One misstep meant death. Beside him, Rachel Evans, a single mother who had joined the competition hoping to win money for her son's medical bills, clenched her fists. Her body trembled, but she knew she had to survive. For her child. Another voice whispered nearby. David Brooks, a cunning businessman, muttered under his breath, "We need to find a way to beat this." But was there a way to beat it? Or was this game rigged from the start? With each passing second, the field became a graveyard. Friends, strangers, all falling one by one. The lucky ones reached the finish line, collapsing in relief. But the unlucky. Their bodies lay still in the dirt, a chilling reminder that this game had only one rule: survive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the survivors stood trembling at the finish line, the blood-stained ground behind them. The doll's eyes dimmed, signaling the end of the first round. But they knew the nightmare was far from over, because this was just the beginning. Nathan's breath was steady, but his heart pounded like a war drum. He had made it past the first round, but the nightmare wasn't over. The remaining contestants, once 100 strong, were now barely half that number. The field, once untouched and pristine, was now littered with bodies. Blood soaked the ground, and the metallic scent of gunfire lingered in the air. The survivors barely had time to process what had happened before a heavy metal door slid open in the distance. A group of masked figures emerged, dressed in identical crimson jumpsuits, their faces hidden behind featureless black masks. They moved in perfect synchronization, stepping between the bodies with eerie indifference. Nathan clenched his fists as they methodically removed the fallen players, dragging lifeless bodies toward a large black van parked at the far end of the field. No names were called, no explanations given. Just silence, broken only by the low hum of the van's engine. Rachel, standing a few feet away, wiped a tear from her cheek. She had been gripping the hem of her hoodie so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "What the hell is this place?" she whispered, her voice trembling. No one had an answer. The survivors were ushered through a steel tunnel, their feet echoing against the cold floor. The walls were smooth and metallic, with no windows, no signs, no way to know where they were being led. The air smelled sterile, like a hospital, but the energy was far from comforting. They finally emerged into a massive, circular room. A neon scoreboard flickered above, displaying the number 52, the count of those who remained. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, decorated with an array of dim, pulsating lights. The walls were painted a dull gray, giving the space a lifeless, industrial feel. The players stood on a raised platform surrounded by multiple doors, each marked with a glowing number. Above them, a loudspeaker crackled to life. "Congratulations, contestants! You have survived round 1. The next game will begin soon. Please rest and prepare accordingly." The voice was emotionless, robotic. Nathan glanced around, scanning the other players. Some clung to each other in silent terror, while others stood frozen, their minds unable to process the horror they had just endured. David Brooks, the sharp-dressed businessman, exhaled sharply and shook his head. "We need answers," he muttered. "We need to know who's behind this." "Yeah?" Another player, a burly man with a scar across his jaw, scoffed. "And how do you plan on getting those answers?" David didn't respond. He simply adjusted his tie, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Rachel, still shaken, looked up at the numbered doors. "Are we supposed to sleep here?" As if in response, the walls shifted and narrow beds slid out from hidden compartments. Each one was marked with a corresponding number. "Looks like we don't have a choice," Nathan muttered. The players hesitated, but exhaustion was taking its toll. Some collapsed onto the beds immediately while others remained standing, too paranoid to let their guard down. Nathan sat on the edge of his assigned bed, staring at the ceiling. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just a game. This was an experiment. A test. But for what? And for whose entertainment? As the lights dimmed, a final message flashed across the neon scoreboard. Round 2 begins at dawn. Nathan exhaled, lying back on the stiff mattress. He knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, the real nightmare would begin. The cold, artificial light flickered on, snapping Nathan out of his restless sleep. A loud buzzer echoed through the air, signaling that round 2 was about to begin. The other players groaned, some sitting up groggily, others already wide-eyed with paranoia. No one had truly slept. Fear had kept them awake, lingering in every breath, in every shadow. The neon scoreboard above the room now displayed 52, a grim reminder of how many remained. A few players whispered among themselves, strategizing, while others simply stared at the floor, their minds broken from the horrors of the first round. Then the robotic voice returned. "Contestants, please proceed through door 3. Round 2 will begin shortly." A metallic clunk echoed as a large steel door slid open. Beyond it lay a narrow hallway, its walls a lifeless gray. One by one, the players hesitantly stepped inside, each footstep heavy with dread. Nathan kept Rachel close, his instincts screaming at him to stay alert. David walked ahead, his posture stiff, his mind clearly working through every possible angle. As they emerged into the next arena, an unsettling realization hit them all at once. They were in a massive, windowless room designed to look like an old playground. The walls were painted with faded murals of cartoonish animals, and the ground was covered in sand, but there was no warmth to it, only a cruel mockery of childhood innocence. Swings creaked as if someone had just stepped off them. A rusted slide loomed in the corner, its surface chipped and jagged. And at the center of the room stood a single towering jungle gym made of twisted metal bars. It resembled something out of a nightmare, a structure that was once meant for fun but now held an ominous weight. The robotic voice returned. Round 2. The climb. The players stiffened. Objective: reach the top before time runs out. Failure to do so will result in elimination. A low hum filled the air as a massive digital countdown appeared above them. 05 AC. 5 minutes. That was all the time they had to reach the top. Nathan's gut twisted. This wasn't just a game of speed, it was a game of survival. The jungle gym was intentionally designed to be unstable. The bars were spaced unevenly, some slick with grease, others sharp with rusted edges. The structure swayed slightly, as if daring them to climb. Then came the final announcement. Warning: pushing, pulling, and sabotage are permitted. A chilling silence fell over the group. Some players exchanged uneasy glances. Others, like the scarred man from the night before, smirked knowingly. The meaning was clear. This wasn't just a test of agility. It was a fight. The buzzer blared. The game had begun. Rachel was the first to move, gripping a lower bar and hoisting herself up. Nathan followed, his muscles straining as he climbed. He glanced over his shoulder just in time to see chaos erupt below. Two players were already shoving each other, one man clawing at another's ankle, dragging him down. A woman let out a scream as she lost her grip and fell to the sand below with a sickening crunch. No gunfire this time, just the certainty of failure. Nathan gritted his teeth. "Keep moving," he called to Rachel. She didn't need to be told twice. David, just a few rungs ahead, was climbing methodically, his movements controlled and precise. But others weren't so careful. A desperate man tried to leap past another climber, only for his foot to slip. He tumbled backward, his body smashing against the lower bars before he hit the ground, unmoving. 3 minutes left. The higher Nathan climbed, the more unstable the jungle gym became. The bars creaked under the weight of multiple players, some sections beginning to bend. Every move had to be calculated. One misstep, one slip, and it was over. 2 minutes. Near the top, Rachel let out a startled gasp as someone grabbed her wrist. One of the remaining players, a woman with frantic eyes, was trying to pull herself up by using Rachel as leverage. "Let go," Rachel yelped, struggling to shake her off. But the woman wouldn't let go. Desperation had overtaken reason. Nathan saw it happening and made a split-second decision. He lunged forward, kicking the woman's hand off Rachel's arm. She shrieked, her body plummeting into the chaos below. He didn't look down. He couldn't. 1 minute left. Nathan, Rachel, and David scrambled the final few feet, their fingers gripping the highest bar just as the timer hit 0.15. Below them, players still fought desperately, some clambering over others, some pulling each other down. A man nearly made it to the top until someone shoved him off. His scream was cut short by a sickening thud. 5 seconds. 4. 3. 2. The buzzer rang. The remaining players who hadn't reached the top froze in horror. Then, without warning, the jungle gym retracted violently, its lower bars collapsing inward. The unlucky few still clinging to the lower rungs were swallowed by the shifting metal. Their screams were cut short as the structure crushed inward, sealing their fate. Nathan exhaled sharply, gripping the top bar as he steadied himself. They had survived. For now. Nathan sat on the cold steel floor, his back pressed against the numbered wall of the dormitory. His hands trembled as he wiped sweat from his forehead, but he wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or the raw fear still gripping his chest. His heart pounded and his muscles ached from the brutal climb. Across the room, Rachel curled into herself, her knees pulled tightly against her chest. She hadn't spoken a word since they returned from round 2. Her fingers twitched, ghosting over the bruises on her arm, the same spot where the desperate woman had latched onto her. The woman Nathan had kicked off. Nathan hadn't wanted to do it. He didn't even think, he just reacted. And yet, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear her scream, could still see the terror in her face as she fell. He had killed her, even if he hadn't meant to, even if it was to save Rachel. It didn't change the fact that another person had died because of him. David, sitting on the opposite side of the room, seemed far less disturbed. His tie was loosened, his shirt untucked, but his expression remained sharp and calculating. He was watching the other players, studying them like pieces on a chessboard. "We lost 12 more," he murmured, mostly to himself. 40 remain. Nathan barely heard him. His mind was still trapped in the last game. The chaos, the desperation, the violence. He wasn't the only one struggling. Some players sat in silence, staring at the floor, their eyes empty. Others clenched their fists, muttering to themselves, trying to convince themselves they were still alive. A few fought the rising panic, their bodies shaking with barely restrained sobs. Then there were the ones who had embraced the brutality. The scarred man, Nathan had heard someone call him Garrett, sat with his arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. He had been one of the players actively shoving others off the jungle gym, ensuring his own survival by eliminating the competition. "See?" Garrett chuckled, nudging the man beside him. "I told you, you gotta play the game, not just survive it." The man next to him, a younger player with wide, nervous eyes, nodded but said nothing. David scoffed, rubbing his temple. "You think this is a joke?" Garrett shrugged. "No joke, just the rules. They said sabotage was allowed, didn't they?" He leaned forward, his smirk widening. "You think this ends with us all holding hands and walking away happy? The weak die first. Always." Rachel's fists clenched. "That weak woman you pushed off that jungle gym, she might have had a family." Garrett's smile faded for a moment before he scoffed. "Yeah, so did the guy that soldier boy over there sent flying." Nathan stiffened, his nails dug into his palms. Rachel's eyes widened, glancing at Nathan, but he didn't react. Garrett chuckled. "See? Doesn't matter if you're nice or not. When it's between you and them, you'll make the same damn choice every time." A loud metallic clang echoed through the room, cutting through the tension like a knife. The scoreboard flickered, 40 contestants remaining. Then the robotic voice returned. "Lights out in 5 minutes. Round 3 begins at dawn." The players barely moved. Some sat in stunned silence, still processing the horrors they had survived. Others whispered in hushed tones, already strategizing for the next round. Rachel's grip on her hoodie tightened. "How many more rounds do you think there are?" she whispered. David exhaled. "Too many." Nathan said nothing. His mind was already preparing for the next game, because if Garrett was right, if the weak died first, then he needed to make sure he wasn't next. Nathan lay on his back, staring at the cold, metallic ceiling. The dormitory was silent now, save for the occasional shuffle of someone shifting in their bunk. The overhead lights had dimmed, signaling it was time to rest. But no one truly slept. Sleep meant vulnerability. Sleep meant letting your guard down. Rachel was curled up in the bunk beside him, her breathing shallow, her body tense. She hadn't spoken since their argument with Garrett. Maybe she was replaying the same scene over and over, just like he was. The woman falling, her scream still echoing in their heads. Nathan exhaled, turning onto his side. Across the room, David sat upright, watching the other contestants in the dark. His mind was always working, calculating odds, planning ahead. Nathan wasn't sure if that made him an ally or a threat. Then there was Garrett. He was leaning back on his bed, hands behind his head, as if he didn't have a care in the world. But Nathan knew better. Garrett wasn't relaxed. He was waiting. Everyone was, because in just a few hours they would face round 3. A sudden noise shattered the silence. A loud, piercing screech. Nathan bolted upright. So did half the room. The scoreboard flickered violently, the numbers shifting, 40 contestants remaining, and then, without warning, the lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. Someone gasped. Then came the whispers. Low. Uneasy. "What the hell is happening?" A new voice, sharp, panicked. "This isn't part of the game, is it?" A low hum filled the air, followed by the robotic voice. "Round 3 begins now." A pause. Then a second message. "Survive the night." Nathan's stomach dropped. A faint click echoed in the dark, metal sliding against metal. Someone had a weapon. Then, all at once, chaos erupted. A scream tore through the dormitory as the first body fell. Nathan barely had time to react before someone lunged toward him in the dark. He rolled off his bunk, hitting the floor hard as a fist whizzed past his face. His attacker, a shadow in the darkness, stumbled forward, cursing. More sounds followed, grunts, gasps, the sickening thud of fists connecting with flesh. Rachel scrambled off her bunk, her breath shaky. "Nathan." "Stay close," he hissed, grabbing her wrist. Bodies crashed into one another as players fought blindly, some out of fear, others out of cold, calculated strategy. Someone yelped, then gargled, choking on their own blood. Someone had a knife. Nathan's mind raced. They planned this. Whoever's behind this, they want us to kill each other. David's voice rang out from across the room. "Get to the walls. Now! Keep your back covered." Nathan didn't hesitate. He pulled Rachel with him, pressing them both against the cold steel. Around them, shadows moved violently, shapes twisting, fists swinging, bodies dropping. A man shrieked, "Stop! Stop!" No one stopped. This wasn't about winning a game anymore. This was about making it to morning. Garrett's laughter rang through the air, wild and unhinged. "Told you," he shouted. "Only the strong survive." Nathan clenched his fists. He needed a weapon, something, anything to defend himself and Rachel, but all he had was his fists. Rachel shuddered beside him. "Nathan." He looked down. Even in the darkness he could see it, the terror in her eyes. He swore under his breath. He wasn't going to let her die here. Another scream, another thud, more bodies hitting the floor. The scoreboard flickered again, the number dropping. 40. 38. 35. Nathan exhaled sharply. He wasn't sure who was going to make it out of this night alive, but he sure as hell was going to try. By the time the lights flickered back on, the dormitory had become a graveyard. Nathan stood motionless, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Blood, not his, splattered across his shirt. The metallic scent hung thick in the air, mixing with sweat and fear. Bodies lay sprawled across the floor, some still, others twitching as life slowly drained from them. The neon scoreboard buzzed, updating the count. 40. 27. 13 more gone. Rachel was still pressed against the wall beside him, her breathing shallow, her hands shaking. But she was alive. So was David, crouched a few feet away, eyes scanning the carnage with sharp calculation. Garrett, of course, was grinning. He wiped a streak of blood from his cheek, shaking his head. "Well, that was fun." Nathan had to force himself not to react. He had learned something last night, something about the way this game worked. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about control. The people running this weren't just testing their physical strength. They were testing their limits. How far could they be pushed before they snapped? How many people would betray their morals just to stay alive? This wasn't just a game. It was an experiment. Nathan wasn't sure who was watching, who was pulling the strings behind this nightmare. But one thing was certain. Whoever they were, they wanted to see people break. The robotic voice returned, as cold and lifeless as ever. "Round 4 begins soon. Prepare accordingly." Nathan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He wasn't going to break. Not now, not ever. The deadly game in the story reflects a harsh reality. Society often rewards the strong, the cunning, and those willing to adapt, while the weak are left behind. In modern America, competition is relentless, whether in careers, economics, or social dynamics. People are constantly tested, not with life-or-death stakes, but through pressure, survival instincts, and moral dilemmas. Just like in the game, fear and desperation can drive individuals to betray their values. In a world driven by power and control, those who manipulate others often rise to the top. However, true strength isn't just about physical survival. It's about integrity, strategy, and resilience. The story also warns about how systems, whether governments, corporations, or social structures, test people's breaking points, exploiting their fears to maintain control. Understanding these hidden forces helps individuals navigate life without losing their humanity. In the end, survival isn't just about outlasting others, it's about knowing when to fight, when to trust, and when to resist a game rigged against you.